Hello, everyone. This is going to be a quick tutorial video on your semester one test. Um, like I mentioned in the propaganda video, I wanted to cover this in a live session this week, but unfortunately, I was not aware of how the exams were running, so a video is going to be our next best thing. So w- what you want to do is you want to make sure to watch this video before you run in and try and take your semester test because there's some things that you probably are going to want to look at and review. So remember that your semester test, you are taking it next week, but on Tuesday, but you legitimately have until the end of the class in January until the 3rd. So I'm going to pull this up really quick. So your course exam is starting on the 18th, which is Tuesday next week. It's going to be due on the 20th, which is the last day of the before break. So you have plenty of time to do the post test. And then it's not closing until January 3rd, which would be the last day of the semester. I believe that's the last day of the semester. Actually the 4th. So the day before the end of the semester, it's closing. So you have that there. So just so you're aware how that's all going to look and run. But when you go into the content, you're going to see, hopefully you looked at the propaganda video, and then now we're looking at the semester test. So there's a couple of things that you can look at before you get there. So you have a study guide, which is a Google Doc. These two are actually the exact same thing. The difference is one is a Google Doc and one is a Word document. So if one's easier for you to get to, then use whichever one you would like. But as we're going into, I'm opening up the Google Doc just because it's in this view, it's a little bit more friendly when you're in the class. So basically, what the semester exam is going to consist of, it has three reading passages. So the first and the second passage are both informational text with firsthand accounts of slavery. Okay, so the first passage is an excerpt from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and the second passage is an excerpt from the incidents in the life of a slave girl by Harriet Jacobs. Okay, so pretty similar text. And then the third passage is a fictional piece that's an excerpt from a larger piece called Saki called The Lumber Room. So there are multiple choice questions attached to each of the three reading passages. So there's 25 questions total. Each question is worth 3 points. So the test in total is worth 75 points. Okay, so what you're going to do is those 25 questions are split up among the three readings. And so those are the things that you're going to kind of need to remember. I would suggest if you can go in and look at the questions first before you do the readings, I would maybe go that route. Just some test taking strategy. It's always a good idea to look at those before. But some things that you need to make sure that you're refreshing your memory about are setting, foreshadowing, the purpose of the passage, first, second, third person point of view, tone and the effect tone has on the passage, character development, central idea, mood, theme, irony, word choice, repetition, conflict, making inferences, and choosing evidence to support your inference. So basically, these are things that you have learned all semester long. So it's not something that you're going to be able to cram into like a day and study. These are things that you can refresh your memory about, and you're like, oh yeah, this is what irony is, or this is what theme is, and this is what mood is. But legitimately, these are things you should have been learning for the past like 3 or 4 months. So it's super important that you're not trying to just jam all of this into your head in the next 5 hours. You want to make sure that it's something where you've paid attention through the whole semester and it's going to be information that you probably already know, right? It's kind of a check to see what you've been doing and if you've been paying attention, okay? So this is a skill-based quiz. You will need to know how to find these things in the text. Okay, so there is a Quizlet here. And so what this Quizlet does, when you click on the picture of the Quizlet, what's going to happen is it's going to open, hopefully. There we go. It's going to give you the option to review. So there's flashcards. You can do that. There's different types of games. There's like a matching, there's a write, there's a learn. So you can use this, and I'm sure most of you have used Quizlet before. So you can go through and look and study through that way through a lot of the terminology to help you review, right? So you have that option. So the other thing that I want to show you really quick is to give you a quick review at what we're looking at. So we have about 9 minutes here that I'm going to go through this next PowerPoint and give you a refresher on a lot of these items and some of the things that you should be focusing on. So I'm going to pause just a second. Okay, so this is basically just a quick review of a lot of the terminology and things that are going to be in your exam. So just a reminder, again, you kind of have the freedom to take it at any point on Tuesday morning, but that's when English is set up is Tuesday morning, 8 or 9 o'clock, for you to go in and start your exam for English. Um, so again, 25 questions kind of gives you the same information that I just went over, what's going to be on the test. Key terms to study, talked about that. So test taking strategies, very important. Read everything. Don't go through and just assume that the answer one is going to be the right answer. That's a bad habit to get into. Make sure that you're reading every single question. Take your time. Always go back to the passage to answer questions. Reread if you don't get the passage the first time and be confident. Okay. So what is the effect of using the first person narrative versus third person? And between what is the difference between third person limited and omniscient? So I'm looking, hold on one second. Okay, so this threw me off a little bit. So we did not read 11 in our class, but think back to some of the other short stories that we've read and some of the things that we've talked about first person versus third person, especially like in a lot of our writings that we've just been doing. So look at that. Obviously, first person is when you can use I, right? Third person is like someone telling the story kind of from above. So look at that. How do you identify the shift in tone? Look at the strongly connotative words. So look at what, the just that figurative language, and if we're talking about like a happy tone, an angry tone, a sad tone, kind of like what we just did in the FDR speech, right? Or the speech where we Lou Gehrig. So look at those. What was the tone in those? So think of those things. And making inferences is a key skill to have. How do you know if your inference is correct? Basically, look for evidence to support what your inference is, and that's kind of what you're thinking of. So like our inferences, so when we're looking at the Lou Gehrig speech that we read, our inferences were that, while something really bad happened to him, he's pretty positive and grateful and thankful for the fact that he was able to make all of these friends and have this wonderful career and do everything he did in baseball, right? So we're inferring that while being diagnosed with what he has kind of stinks, he's really grateful for the opportunities that he's had. So we're kind of inferring that. So what are the ways that we learn about characters? So we talked a lot about direct characterization, right? So the author talks directly. We talked a lot about indirect characterization. So that's a lot of times through their speech, thoughts, and emotion. Is character development limited to one line or paragraph? Obviously not, right? It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It can be developed throughout the entire story, right? So we have that. So we learned a lot about that in Cask of Amontillado. So, how do you determine the central idea of a reading passage? Remember, you look for the idea that's repeated throughout the story. So, like in the Lou Gehrig speech, he kept saying how thankful he was. So, we kind of knew that that was the central idea. It was that he was thankful, right? So, what is the author saying about the central idea? Can it be stated, but it's most often implied if it's not stated. Most of the time in a reading, you're going to find that it's not going to be stated directly, it will be implied. So it's kind of like they're in a roundabout way saying that. So just kind of remember that there are a lot of times they're not directly going to state it. Um, so what is the best, or when you're choosing evidence to support an inference, how do you know which sentence is the best? So Rachel, so for example, which sentence best shows that Rachel is embarrassed to connect, or to be connected to the red sweater? I wish I was invisible, but I'm not. But the worst part is right before the bell rings before lunch. I take it off right away and give it to her. Only Mrs. Price pretends like everything is okay. Um, I would pick A because she's like, that's to me is what is saying that like she's really embarrassed by wearing that, right? So then you're looking at the mood. What is the mood of the passage? So that's kind of the tone and the atmosphere that you have. And you can look at that in the setting. So like in Cask of Amontillado, the the tone a lot of times was dark and gloomy because they were down in the catacombs, right? So kind of think of it that way. So we're looking at the tone and the mood. And then what are some strategies to determine unknown words in context? Basically looking at all of the words around in the sentence, you're using context clues. So look at, if there's a vocabulary word you don't understand, usually you can figure out what it means by looking at the words around it. So those context clues are really important. Um, theme is the universal message that applies to pretty much everything. And then a lot of times you have to infer it again. It's not directly stated, but there's always evidence to support theme, right? And then also you're looking at tone. How do you determine tone? So tone is usually the attitude. So in the Lou Gehrig um, speech, tone was grateful, right? His attitude was he was grateful or thankful. So then a lot of you said that that he was grateful or thankful. So that's what you're looking at, right? And then what are the different purposes that the writer has for writing? A lot of times it's to entertain, persuade, or inform. Some stories have certain structure with dialogue, character development, plot. They're meant to entertain. Persuasive pieces have rhetoric. The author uses different techniques to try and convince the reader. So there's a lot of different things there, right? So just looking through and making sure that you're going through some of those things that we've covered. Just refresh your memory, look back at some things before you take the test. So basically, this question is just asking which word below is appropriate to describe the tone of the paragraph. So if you look at this paragraph, it has to belong to somebody. Mrs. Price kept saying, but no one could remember. It's an ugly sweater with the red plastic buttons and colored sleeves, all stretched out like you could use it for a jump rope. It's maybe 1,000 years old, and even if it belongs to me, I wouldn't say so. So is it malicious, curious, playful, or annoyed? Which one of those would make you think would fit into that? What's the tone of that paragraph? So for me, I would say annoyed. That was what would fit the best there. Then what details does the author include to establish tone? Notice the negative connotations of the word. So yeah, so there are some negative connotations. So ugly sweater, all stretched out, and maybe 1,000 years old. If it belonged to me, I wouldn't say so, right? So there's a lot of different words that you can look in there to figure out the tone. So I know this was super quick, but hopefully that's going to help you a little bit. Do the Quizlet, go through. Don't feel rushed to absolutely do this on Tuesday. You have a lot more time. You can do it over break if you want to. One of the good things about this is I have allowed you to do this quiz more than one time. So you have two chances on this quiz. So if you bomb it the first time, you can go back and redo the second time. Let me know if you have a question, guys. Thank you.